Hey there, welcome to my second video on making detailed scale models in Blender. In the previous video, I talked about how to collect large amounts of pictures and other references that you can use for detailing your model. I also talked about the importance of collecting good drawings that you can use as reference material for your Blender projects, and then talked about ways to convert these drawings into a unified set of images that can be used as image planes within Blender, and these will be used as the background for scaling and shaping our objects. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to take these planes these images that we created in the last video, and bring them into Blender, and then set up basically the foundation of your project. Getting the image plane set up properly early on makes a huge difference in the project. All right, so let's take a look at Blender here. I have a Blender project here. There's nothing in it yet. I do have a couple of collections set up. These are standard collections that I typically start off with, and we're just going to deal with this one right now, the image planes text collection. And to add an image plane to your scene, you want to actually go under empties, right? So if you're new to Blender, an image plane is just a picture that you're going to bring in and use as a backdrop to your project, and you can kind of use that to trace the outline of your model. And we'll get into that in future videos. But right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Add, create an empty, and go to Image. And it's just going to create this blank thing here. But then if you go over here to Object Data Properties, you can open, and we're going to find the place where we put our image planes, right? And we can look at, these are the image planes that we created in the last video. And I'm not going to do all of them right now because it's going to be repetitive, but I'm going to go through a couple of them and show you what's important here. I usually like to start with the best side view that I have, which is this one here. And I can see when I click on that, it brings in this image. And I know from my reference material that this particular aircraft is 9,020 millimeters in length. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that everything I build in Blender is full scale. So if the aircraft is 9,000 millimeters long, then I want to make a model in Blender that's 9,000 millimeters long. And the reason you want to do that, well, there are a couple of reasons. One is lighting, volumetrics, cameras, they all work with real-world dimensions. So if you have things that are full size, those elements of your scene will work easier, right? You won't be trying to render something that's really tiny and make it look big. You're going to be rendering it at full scale. The other reason to do it is as you build more assets, some things can be shared between projects. So we could make, maybe a pilot figure or maybe weapons for this that could be reused in other projects. If those are all made to 1:1 scale, then it's just a matter of dragging and dropping them into your project, and it makes future projects that much easier because you don't have to worry about rescaling them or resizing them. And then if I was then to take this airplane and put it into a scene with other aircraft, and if all the other aircraft are set up to be 1:1 scale, I don't have to worry about trying to figure out, this airplane was half scale and that one was 1.5 scale, and I've got to scroll, size things back and forth. So it just makes life easier, particularly as you get more and more projects. So what I do is I create a cube, and I'm going to apply rotation and scale to this. And we're going to look over here, and we can see under item that we're at 2,000 millimeters. And what we really want is 9,020 millimeters as the length. So the y-axis needs to be 9,020 millimeters, right? And that's how long the ME-109 is. And I also know that the wingspan on the 109, which is going to be the x-axis, is 9,924 millimeters. So this is a bounding box for our model. From front to back, the tip of the nose should be right here, the tip of the end of the rudder should be there, and then the wingtips will be on edge to edge. And to make it a little easier to see, I'm just going to change that to wireframe, and that gives me my box. Again, I'm just going to apply rotation and scale because it's a good habit to be in. Later on, we'll talk about why it's important to have your scale settings to 1, because you can cause all kinds of weird problems with your modifiers and UVs if they're not. But for now, that's our bounding box. So if I go into side view and I scale this up, and I just want to make this fit inside here. And what I'm going to do is, one thing you can do is I'm just going to select these, and I'm going to move my cursor to this point. I'm going to make sure that I'm in 3D cursor mode, and I'm going to take my empty, and I'm just going to move it along until the tip of that gun is right on that edge. And now because I'm in cursor mode, I can scroll, and I can scale, and it's going to scale from that point. You can see how the nose is sticking where it's supposed to be. I'm just going to bring this back up here and keep scaling until my line here matches up with my bounding box. And now I know that this image plane is scaled to be 9,020 millimeters long. The next thing we want to do is we want to change this. So I'm just going to call this side main because this is going to be my go-to. This is the best drawing I've got, so I want to make sure that I remember that. And I want to go into the image plane. And under here they have opacity. I'm going to turn that down to 0.5 so we can see through a little bit. And for the model, we just happen to have the center line of the aircraft right here running through the y-axis. All right, so that's that one. And I'm just going to move this one off here on the x-axis just to get out of the way for a minute. Now I'm going to go to top view. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add an empty, right? An empty image. And this time we're going to pick a different image. So let's pick the top this time. And I can scroll, scale this up. And I'm going to rotate it around. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to move this all the way up here. And put that right there. Now I'm going to add a center, so I control R. So now I have a loop cut going through the center of the model, and I'm going to move my cursor right there. So now my cursor is really in the middle of my bounding box right there. So if I go into top view, I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to scale it up so that the wingtips just touch the edge of my bounding box. So you can see what that looks like. And if the drawings were done properly, we should have the front to back nicely inside the bounding box and the wingtips inside the bounding box. Now it's important at this stage to add some extra checks to make sure that things are lining up properly, because you don't want to get further on into the modeling process and suddenly discover that maybe this canopy line from the side is one place, but if you look at it from the top, it lines up somewhere else. So one way we can kind of test that early on is if we go in our bounding box, I'm in edit mode, and I do control R. I'm just going to put a loop cut right at the front of the canopy. I'm going to pick a couple other places where I have a nice obvious line. So at the back of the prop, and we'll try one of these seams back here. These will probably not line up because they're not as important a detail as like a canopy, but we'll see what happens. And we'll probably add more as we go along. But with any luck, when I go in the top view, this line will be at the front. Yeah, actually that's where the canopy seam is. This line should be pretty close to the canopy seam in our top view. And you can see it's a little off, but this drawing here, and if you remember from my last video, I said some drawings are better than others. This drawing wasn't a particularly good drawing. So I'm not overly concerned that this canopy line doesn't quite line up there. The prop line's pretty close, and this last panel line here is pretty close. And like I said in the last video, if you see a discrepancy between drawings, like I said, there's a discrepancy right here, pick the better of your drawings and say, okay, that's where the line's going. All right, so we're going to take our top plane, we're going to move this up. And I like to move them fairly far out of the way, because when you're working in here, they're not going to get in the way when you're working on your model. So if you push them fairly far up in the sky and push them off to the sides, they tend to stay out of your way. Another thing you can do is you notice that in here we've got these both side front back buttons, and this is the visibility of the image plane from different sides. So if I click on this, and now if I look from the bottom, I don't see it. All right, we're going to leave that on for a minute, but eventually we're going to turn that off so that we get clearer views when we go into top, bottom, side view. So let's go into, again, we're in top view. I'm going to recenter my cursor. I'm going to rename this as top. And I'm just going to hide it now for a minute because I don't need to see it. And I'm going to add the bottom one. So image, empty image. And I'm going to add bottom one. Where's the bottom one? And I have a couple bottoms. I'm going to add the better of the two. If you remember from the last video, I had a pretty nice bottom image. Again, rotate it, move it forward along the y-axis, and I want to get that cannon right on the edge there. And I've moved my cursor, so I'm going to put it back there. And again, scale this up until my wingtips just touch the edge of my bounding box. All right, and if I unhide my top view, let's change that to 50%. And if I go, and I'm going to select my bottom view. If I go into top view, hopefully they line up pretty well. And if they don't line up pretty well, sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. In this case, I've decided that, and if you remember from the last video, remember this was a better drawing. So I'm going to say that this one is probably the better of the two drawings. It's more detailed, and maybe I can move it back a little bit. Maybe it's a little proud there, and certainly needs to move over a little bit because it's not quite centered. And we'll double check our edges, and maybe a little bit bigger. And if we go back in the top view and compare my top, I'll call this bottom, and look at my top one, and start looking to make sure that things line up. This is okay. The wings are pretty close. The shape of the outside of the wing is different, but like I said, the bottom drawing is probably better, so I'll probably use that profile. The overall length of the top seems to be off. So like the elevators seem to be a little proud there. So I'm going to actually just scale it in the y-axis a little bit, and it's going to bring that the elevators a little forward, make the plane fit a little better. All right, and that's pretty much the process for going along. So now that let's move this down, move this out of the way. And since that one's kind of set and we like what it is, I'm going to actually change the visibility of it so that it's only visible from the back. So when I look at it from the top, I don't see it. And that way I'm not looking through multiple kind of X-ray layers of the image. And I'm going to do the same thing with the top image. I don't want to see that from the bottom. So I'm going to switch that to front so I just see it from the top. And I'm going to do a similar thing with the side image so that when we're looking at it from the left side, we don't see it. All right, I'm going to pause the video for a minute, and I'm going to add the rest of the image planes because the rest of the process is identical. There's no reason for you to watch me do all that. So I'll be back in a second. All right, I'm back. I added all of the image planes that we created from part 1 into the scene. I have set the opacity of them to 0.25, and I've set the side so that they're only visible from the side that I'm interested in. Now's a good time to double check to make sure that the work we did in step 1, where we created these planes and we scaled them, now's a good time to check to make sure that all those things really do line up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out, just going to hide some of these, and we'll go into side view, and I'm going to select my bounding box again, and we're just going to add some loop cuts and move some things around just to double check, because if you check now and you find a mistake, you're in good shape because you haven't done any modeling yet. The problem comes when you find a mistake much later on in your model and things aren't lining up and you're fighting with it, and you realize that you spent hours modeling something only to realize that the scale on something was off, or that your image plane was slightly cockeyed or something. So here I'm just moving the top and bottom of my bounding box to be just at the top of the rudder and just at the bottom of the fuselage here. And if we look at it from the front, if we did things properly, that line's going to be close, and there's an intake here, so you can't quite see where it is. Look from the back, turn that off. That one's like that. That one's wrong. All right, so look at from the back, right across the bottom there, that's good. Right at the top of the rudder, that's good. Let's take a look from the side. Is there any other landmarks we can pick that maybe might be useful? Sometimes going from the top, for example, we want to make sure that the wing root matches top and bottom, so I'm going to add a loop cut right there, right at the wing root, and if we look at the bottom, hopefully that lines up. It does, so that's good to know. Things are looking pretty good here. In the next chapter, we'll use the cross sections that come with these drawings to create the base mesh for the fuselage. So I hope to see you in the next chapter.